Welcome to the second episode of Chats Kenya, a podcast series where we dive into the fast evolving world of electric mobility right here in Kenya. I'm your host Abigael Kima, and today I am joined by Warren Ondanje again. In the previous episode, we unpacked the evolution of e-mobility in Kenya, and some of the feedback I received is that we do not talk about this topic enough. Today we're looking at the intersection of climate change and e-mobility. And as usual at Hali, Hewa, we are proud to bring you a platform where you can hear from experts from the African continent, and we are honored to have Warren Ondanje taking us through this series. Welcome, Warren.
Sure. Second episode, I'm ready to go with the flow.
Awesome. Nice to have you again. I've definitely gotten some feedback from the audience about how important this conversation is for all of us to have because, mobility, we basically move around in our lives every day. So I think it's a conversation that everyone wants to hear, wants to learn more about. And so today we want to look at the intersection between e-mobility and climate change. And I know in the first episode, we did touch a bit on it and how it sort of relates to climate change, climate impacts, why we need to reduce emissions. But today we want to really dive deeper into it. And so first off, how would you say e-mobility relates to climate change for someone who probably doesn't know anything about climate change?
Yeah, it's actually a very important question to be asking because when we talk about electric cars, many people immediately go to the tech side of things. They think about, better transport, AI, autonomous cars, all this. But from a climate perspective, electric cars are meant to be a more efficient technology compared to the traditional fossil fuel vehicles. Because we're talking of, again, from that example I talked about last time, for every 10 liters or 10 units of energy that you put in, with a normal car, you're actually using 3 units to move. But with an electric car, you're using 8 of those units to move. So there's a better usage of the same amount of energy in going further, meaning that for people who depend on transport to make their money, then this is an opportunity to increase their earnings. And when it comes to climate, these vehicles don't use fuel, they use electricity, therefore no tailpipe emitters. Meaning when you're sitting on a border in a bus, in your car, you're not going to choke up because of all the smoke that's coming around. And it's a much cleaner environment operated. And the second point to that is that it depends on where the electricity is coming from. So if it's coming from a clean source, like in Kenya with more than 85% renewable energy, that this means you're promoting very clean environment. Renewable electricity is a good thing because it not only creates jobs, but it's renewable in its sense. You're not relying on importing fossil fuels that go on to be combusted and emit greenhouse gases.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing that. And now that you mentioned our grid being very green, almost 85%, I had an interesting experience about a week ago. We went to the Olkaria geothermal plant, and we got to the place, and there was a geothermal dam being dug. I guess I don't know if that's the name, but the machinery that was doing that work was using fossil fuels. Of course, I understand. I guess it's still part of mobility because these are machinery and there are basically cars or machinery that can't easily be moved or can't be, I guess, powered by renewable energy sources. And it was such a paradox because I know Kenya brags of its grid being almost 90% renewable, but then it was very interesting to see that, and I was asking questions about it and thinking, if we ever were to get to a place where your machinery is powered by electricity that you produce, what would that look like? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually, I would say it's a matter of technology availability because EVs, the electric cars and these transport vehicles, it's still a new technology. not all segments have been completely electrified. If you think about these big um, trucks that carry sand or stones, if you think about construction sites with all these earth movers, they're likely still using fossil fuels because the technology to develop those vehicles of that size and for that function are still in the development stages. Some of them are not in Africa yet, but are probably in overseas markets. It's a matter of time before we'll slowly start seeing them. They still come with huge environmental benefits, but also economic benefits, because imagine if that same vehicle could be powered by electricity. That electricity would pretty much be free because it's being used at source, and to the utility or the generation people, it's such a tiny fraction. And the fact that it was using fossil fuels. Remember, once this plant or this generation facility comes online, it's going to generate many thousands fold over in terms of electricity. So the share of that carbon footprint will just go on becoming more and more negligible. So don't worry. So it is during project development, there is some emissions that happen. But if you compare that with the lifespan of the facility and how much green energy it generates, then it really minimizes that initial impact.
Yeah, I agree. And you talked about availability of technology, and I know policies play a huge part in creating an environment where, say EV can be widespread in the country. And again, we did touch a bit about policy last time, but I'm curious to know whether there's any specific climate policies with the climate change acts that we have and in the plans that we have. I mean, Kenya has updated the nationally determined contributions, and I'm wondering whether there's any specific mentions of electric mobility at all.
Yeah, it's that it's exclusively mentioned that it's going to be one of the mitigation steps under transport towards cleaning up and accelerating Kenya actually towards meeting its nationally determined contributions. We thank whoever was behind the force of updating these second phase of the NDC goals, because now we're committing to 35% reduction by 2025, which is a huge move, and it just shows that there's a lot more confidence in getting to 100%. The road towards net zero or an improved climate situation for Kenya. It also quickly points to the opportunities for investors to come, because even in this determined contributions, 20% will be domestically financed, by 80% the government still relies on external investments and other foreign interventions to actually make this journey happen. So part of that foreign intervention has been the inflows of investments for e-mobility, because today, as we speak, I would think anywhere between 60 and 80% of all investments into e-mobility are actually foreign. They're not local yet.
Yeah, I bet.
The only local financing available is actually in the consumer financing avenues. When you go to the bank and get financing to get your motorbike or buy your bus or whatever it is, it's all local. Other climate provisions that are there are there's a draft national e-mobility policy that's in preparation, and we have fingers crossed for this last 2 years, waiting for it to be finalized and out. Hopefully this will come out. I've always been saying this year, so let me say again, hopefully this year it will be out. But there's commitments through the National Energy Efficiency and Conservation Strategy of 2020 to have the country reach 5% of new EV sales from 2025. This is 2025. The goal was set 5 years ago. We are there on some categories on the motorcycle side, but on other categories, we're still lagging behind. So again, this is another follow-up from a policy angle that needs to be renewed, because the vision will come to its end this year. So let's see, maybe part of the amendment is actually going to be this draft national mobility policy. Other than that, the intermittent financial finance act, these are just tax incentives for EVs that usually are captured as part of national tax, the budget, and then National Finance Bill. So under the Finance Bill of 2025, there's still some provisions for e-mobility, even though at the moment they are not favorable. They keep on changing, and this is one of the drawbacks of depending on finance acts to provide incentives for EVs, because they're only renewed 12 months at a time, and then industry has to keep on lobbying for more incentives. So far, that's where the Kenyan policy landscape is at, but really it's going to be the national e-mobility policy that acts as the foundational document for how things are going to now accelerate.
Amazing. I mean, I really was curious to know whether it's actually been captured, and it's good to hear that it has. And looking at other, whenever we have conversations about energy and energy transition, we always say, like we mentioned, Kenya is doing pretty well when it comes to electrification, but there are other sources of emissions like cooking, and then in this case, our e-mobility sector. And I would say in this space, I have seen a lot more people talking about clean cooking and not very much about e-mobility. So I'm curious to know where the challenge is. Is it that people are not interested? Is it that the language is complicated? Is it that there aren't enough people in the field doing that kind of work?
First of all, you can only go for so many days without cooking or food versus going a few days without transport. So transport is not exactly an immediate pressing need as such. And that's why I see the conversation around electrification of cooking. It's so pertinent because food is one of the very basic needs for all of us. But transport is an enabler for productivity because it allows people to move better, easier, faster, and generate more output. The lessons I've learned, and maybe something to reflect on how e-mobility can draw experience from these other markets, is the conversation has to be touching on the public. Again, going back to how I introduced some perception around e-mobility, that people start thinking about Elon Musk and all these aloof ideas that, oh, it's the technology of the developed world, it's not for Africa. We really have to start touching on what or who does it most affect. And these are the people generating income from transport. And who are these transport operators? They are your border people. It's the person who delivers your pizza tonight when you order one on a Friday night. It's the person who transports someone from point A to B when they're commuting in the morning. So the moment it hits home that it's a public good and it's affecting public infrastructure, then people start considering it. People start taking it more seriously because it has a wider socioeconomic impact. The second point is the health benefits. With EVs, there's zero tailpipe emissions. Just walk into CBD today, especially today on a Friday. Everyone's queuing to leave town. All the buses are crowding to flow in to start collecting people for the evening rush. And the air is just so clogged up, especially after this afternoon heat. Everything feels so stagnated. And with EVs, number one, we don't have that. Number two, it's all silent. So no this hullabaloo of engines roaring everywhere. It provides for such an easier, more relaxed environment that anyone that thinks about their evening commute back home and being quiet, peaceful, and clean feels like this is a technology that should be promoted. Because if you, and I dare anyone in the audience to one day get up, look up at the buses, check out, they have a bus locator, find one, just board it and experience it for yourself. And then there's an economic benefit because, again, going back to the whole idea about the efficiency of an EV, you spend a lot less per kilometer, to the tune of 50 to sometimes 70% less in terms of how much you're spending per kilometer. So this means that the boda guy or the matatu sako can make a lot more money from the same amounts of spending on electricity as they would have spent on fuel. So the savings is
another message, economic benefits. In Kenya, and I understand even in many developing economies, we don't think about climate good, as a first idea. We think about our pockets. We think about how is this going to change my life? But if that change in my life actually has a positive implication on the environment, then it's a double win. Then the final component is the national overview. And I think this now goes to what policymakers like listen to. Job creation, but also increased resilience. We are no longer depending on fossil fuel imports, which is currently costing Kenya to the tune of 600 billion Kenya shillings every single year. And 600 billion shillings against, this is money that can be kept here, and if we are not importing fuel and invested in renewable energy, in creating more jobs for assembly, and it means there's more that the country is keeping. And remember, in this fuel importation story, Kenya actually has to strain a lot because Kenya first has to buy US dollars and then buy fuel. Buying the US dollars is where Kenya's and foreign reserves are strained. So if this money is kept locally, we don't need to actually go start looking for US dollars. We can invest the same Kenya shillings locally to invest in our own renewable energy production, but also help even in the financing of the same assets that are on our roads. So the parallels here are to try and localize. The more the conversation is about how is e-mobility making sense for the average me and you in terms of how we move, in terms of how clean our environment is, but also in terms of what are the gains, because if this is the person who delivers food to you or transports you in the morning and they make more, then even they can feed their family better, they can take care of the family, and there's an overall net good in society. So the story has to be very societal based and very personal.
Yeah. I completely agree with you, because now a lot of the spaces I am at, I think we have done a lot of advocacy, especially when it comes to climate. And now we get to a place where the questions are, okay, where is the livelihood aspect of anything that we're basically trying to sell? And for me, I feel like e-mobility is such an easy thing to sell because we see, like you said, the people who deliver food to your doorstep, you using an electric bus to go to work. It's something that you interact with on a day-to-day basis. So I guess what I'm gathering from what you've shared is basically localizing the narrative so that people can own it and a lot more people can come on board. And as a Gen Z, as an activist and like someone who does a lot of advocacy and a young person, coming from your experience, having been in this space for a long time, what would you say you want to see from the youth movement that you aren't seeing now that can help move the needle in terms of advocacy, in terms of talking about it a lot more? And of course, there's a lot of packaging that has to happen for it to be attractive, like we said, localizing it. But is there something that you feel can come from the youth movement or can come from the activists or advocates to sort of try and socialize this conversation more?
Yeah. Number of things come to mind. Number one is, the Boda Boda is the largest employer, or it's the single largest segment of employing the youth. And these are, fortunately or unfortunately, they happen to be mostly males, but not guys, but not a lot of women in that space.
Mm-hmm.
So there has to be, number one, a clear, realistic story of where is e-mobility making the most sense, and therefore how is it touching on the youth enough for the youth to actually tell about this story and to support this story. So I look at it from the angle of transport as an employer of the youth. So the border people, but also even in the normal public transport space with your mini buses and your buses, these are still young people who are fresh out of school. And some of them, that's their only way of making ends meet, is by being in the transport space. The interesting change here is that there's an upgrade in terms of decency of this new space. EVs are quiet,
if you observed when you go to your Uber app and you order an electric boarder, this guy does not come up to you with some loudest Jamaican music and one of the, horn sirens going all over the place and maybe some green stuck in their mouth. This is now someone who comes with a helmet, a clear reflective vest, decent bike. Everything is very nice and organized. So you feel the sense of professionalism and even dignity from them. And you, as a person, who has previously maybe not been familiar or comfortable around motorbikes, you feel some sort of sense of care around that. So I think the youth in this case, number one, need to look at that change of decence. That finally, e-mobility is even coming with a change of how the boda space is viewed. And now I think the whole profile is being lifted. Even in the public transport space, if you're going into a bus, it's quiet, organized, nice, roomy, and airy. You feel some different type of dignity that's coming to the transport space. So I think an approach from that dignified space, which transport initially did not have much of, can be a way of the youth raising the conversation about how can e-mobility be a tool for change, for creating more respect in the transport space, but also it should also translate to economic gain, because if these people are saving so much money, it should mean like better conditions and across the board. It's not just when you're in the vehicle we feel good, but it should be a wider conversation on what does our transport ecosystem look like when you get out of the matatu or before you get into the matatu. Are you accessing a clean, clear walkway to get there? Do you have a safe stage to wait for your van? Do you have a safe ride home? Like, can you walk comfortable? So there's an expanded conversation that will take time, but I think the youth now need to start empowering themselves with knowledge around what are EVs all about and then where is it affecting. And with that realization, then not only are young people supposed to start going after looking for work in the e-mobility space, because there's a whole range of companies that are now setting up and are looking to employ people. But number two, it's about how is this going to provide better earnings when you work in an e-mobility space. There's a lot of growth and new job opportunities in terms of tech, in terms of repair maintenance that can be found within the e-mobility space. And I think one last opportunity is talking about inclusion. This transport space has primarily usually been male, heavily male represented, but now there's an opportunity for even women and people of other spheres that have previously felt left out, people with disability, people that are in different economic levels, or the youth. It should be a wider conversation about how can everyone be part of the technology right across the board.
Amazing. We also talk about Vision 2030, I don't know, Vision 2060 agenda. And I think in everything that we do, we have a vision of where we want to be. We have a vision of where we probably want to see Kenya in terms of the e-mobility space. So my question to you is, what does that look like in, say, 10 years? And who needs to be at the table to move that conversation forward?
Remember, this is a change of an engine and some gears. That's e-mobility. We're just switching where your energy is coming from and how it's being consumed within our vehicle. It does. If we just think of it that way, then everything else remains the same. At the same bad roads, the same, rowdy conductors. We have the same, delivery guys. That would have been a very narrow focus about where e-mobility is going to look like in future. It's this change of vehicles, same attitude, same infrastructure. But with the way the market is changing, number one, we're having we never used to see bicycles even in Nairobi. They vanished when borders came, but now they're coming back because of the delivery space. So this new reintroduction of e-mobility, in my view, will first trigger some serious considerations about infrastructure in terms of walking and cycling links. This is one of the areas I feel is going to be the biggest change if the policymakers are going to be convinced enough with data and enough pressure from industry as well as the consumers. Second point is public transport is going to evolve because of its renewed sense of decency. I foresee that more people are now going to be attracted towards public transport because if infrastructure improves and the vehicles and the vehicle experience is actually good, then more people are going to consider using public transport for a longer period before they have to consider buying a car. And public transport comes in different ways. It can be the matatus, it can be motorcycles, it can be three-wheelers, it can be taxis. The good thing is we now have the technology to actually facilitate all this in the form of apps and what have you. I also think with the advent of these electric bikes, micromobility will start becoming a real conversation because some people who don't commute a long distance will ask themselves, why exactly should I get into a car? Or why should I wait at a stage for 15 minutes before I have to go into a car for 20 minutes? And yet I can just pick up a bike and take the same 20 minutes and get to work and save the 15-minute wait time. So micromobility will start becoming an important conversation in the form of small vehicles. This could be scooters and could be bicycles. And the last point is about the regional, the transport system. I also see it from a prioritization point, i.e., to what policymakers going to really see it as an opportunity, because the more e-mobility is promoted, the more the country is becoming self-dependent. And I see that the policymakers who hopefully in a decade will have a new crop of people who've seen and experienced this, that promote this. I'm not saying on public platforms whether I want to be in politics or not.
Yeah.
But this, I mean, people at our ages will probably be in senior or influential positions. And hopefully this is where the political will and even the support is now going to change more towards supporting these technologies that bring us independence, but also just give us a fresh breath of air.
Amazing. You've talked about infrastructure, and I think it's very important. Like without the right set of infrastructure, for lack of a better term, I don't think anything can work. And there's no way you can approach this in one way. You have to look at it from a wholesome perspective. What do our roads look like? First of all, what do our roads look like? I could never cycle to work because I could never be safe. Have you seen the way those matatus drive? You're always praying for you to get home safely. And something else that came to mind when you talked about Kenya in 10 years was also the fact that, is our public transport really public? Maybe a conversation for next time. In terms of ownership and how the systems are managed, I think it's always a very touchy conversation to have, but maybe we could have a conversation about it later and then hide for a couple of days so that, we're not.
Yet we could do that. Let's do that in a month or somewhere.
So that we're not looked for. But anyways, it's a wrap. It's a wrap. Today we would love to keep it short and sweet, but thank you, Warren, for sharing a lot on the intersection of climate and e-mobility. And I'm hopeful that as we continue to have these conversations, we'll have a lot more young people talking about it, being involved, understanding the opportunities they can take. Because of course, from the conversations we're having, for me, I feel there's a lot of newness and a lot of opportunities that could come for us young people, especially because we're the ones who are to take after the people who are currently there, whether it's policymakers, whether it's the industry, whether it's, the production, the machinery, the advocacy side of things. So yeah, it was really nice having this conversation with you. I don't know if you have anything else you feel that is pressing and you have to talk about.
Just to, again, the example you've just given about matatu zooming by you and cutting into traffic and all the cures that they do. From a tech point, with EVs for the first time in forever, speed governance did not work. But with EVs, you can actually cap the speed of an EV. You can see how it's been driven. You can slow it down or allow it to speed up past a certain limit. You can actually, there's something called crawl mode. When EVs are about to run out of power, they suddenly cap themselves to a very low speed. And you can actually do that manually. So I think that's also another component of some level of governance that can happen in this new era of technology. But of course, when I speak about that, obviously, then would have bigger questions about privacy and control and who controls. Because today, government can decide, you know what, everyone just switch off all those things on the road today.
I mean, you should have watched. There's a movie on Netflix about electric vehicles. I'm like, is this what we are expecting to see in a few years? Yeah.
Enjoying the benefits first and worry about that later, because really with any technology, including our computers, what we are on can be hacked. It's just that there's more people working on the positive things than the negatives, and these are things that will resolve themselves with time. So there's no point of worrying too much. I think focusing on the progress and the opportunity here is that. And but the last point for me is, when you look at all the traditional vehicles that are on the road that people are importing, it's the brands we've known. But with EVs, maybe 9.5 out of 10 of them, you will never have heard of those brands anywhere else in the world. That tells you that for the first time again, local brands are being built from the scratch. If you say EcoBoda, Mazi Mobility, Paxico, Kiri, all these Arkride, Spiro, locally founded brands. Before then, you'd be talking about your Mercedes, your Hondas, your BMWs, and these are global brands. So there is an opportunity here to take advantage of what's available. And for the first time, maybe we'll have more Kenyans that actually run vehicle companies and can employ more Kenyans there. People will have a whole new set of opportunities in that space. That's what's exciting to me, that we are for the first time redefining how the automotive space looks like, and in many ways now defining how energy is consumed, but how people move, and bringing jobs that will define the next phase of our lives, because your children and your children's children are suddenly going to find better opportunities if you are to embrace this technology.
I am in total agreement. Well, thank you so much for listening to the second episode of the Hali Hewa podcast, where we are doing a series called Charge Kenya with Warren Ondanje, where we are discussing everything e-mobility. See you on the next one.
Hali, Hewa, Hali, Hewa.